Welcome back to Dr. Supercoach YouTube. You're on with Pig, and this is another Pig's Pen episode. We're getting close to the end of this series. This is the 9th episode out of 10. The preseason is fast concluding, and round 0 is now only days away. If you haven't listened to the other 8 episodes in this series, I would encourage you to go and do so. Today, I'm talking with a coach who I consider an expert at navigating the buys and using them to propel yourself up the rankings. This is the newest member of the Insight Fantasy Sports team, Silvertop Hurley on Twitter, or Hurls. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Pig. It's a little bit surreal. I've been a consumer of your content and a few others' content over the last few years, and having my first year of creating a little bit of content and being part of that Insight Fantasy Sports team has been a real different approach. So looking forward to sharing a bit of insight today, talking about buy structures and things like that, which I really pay a lot of attention to. So that's a topic that I think many of the coaches out there might get some value out of.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as Supercoach coaches, we've got to identify where our strengths and weaknesses are and outsource. And one of the things I haven't done well in previous years is the buys. I've often come out of the buys at the same ranking as I kind of went into it, kind of just treaded water. But you yourself, I know you've had some great success in the buys. In 2023, I ran a competition for those 4 weeks of the buys where I challenged coaches to score the most points possible in that 4-week stretch. Out of 500 entrants, can't remember if you end up winning it, but you were right at the top for most of it, and nearly every single week. It wasn't just 1 week you had a big score, it was every single week you were near the top of that. So, and you sent me some of your ranks around the buys in previous years. You said in 2022, you came into it at 960. You came out of the buys under 500. 2023, you came in at 6.5K. You came out of it at 2K. And then even last year was epic. You came into the buys at 83rd rank overall. And then you came out of the buys at 32nd. So every single last 3 years, at least half the ranking, or even better than half, your ranking coming into the buys, kind of no matter what rank you came into them. So, yeah, I guess I'm really keen to get to chat about this because I said outsourcing your weaknesses. I know a lot of people listen to my captain's advice because they don't feel comfortable with that. But this is one where I don't feel comfortable. So I'm keen to pick your brain about the mid-season buys.
Yep.
So, yeah, do you plan for the mid-season buys in your starting team?
Absolutely, I do. Yeah, absolutely. And when I was looking at through those ranks, I must admit the first year, that 2022 one, I reckon it was a bit of a fluke. It was I improved, but I didn't put a lot of effort into it. It was just by luck. But the last 2 years in particular, I have definitely focused in on the buys. I think, and there's lots of people who have different views on this. I listened to some podcasts where last year's winner said he didn't look at the buys at all, and that's okay too. I don't think you necessarily have to do it one way. But I like to see those mid-season buys in particular as an opportunity to really target something that other coaches might not be. And like this year, if you look at the way the buys are structured, when the fixture came out, I probably, like most people, thought this is going to be easy. There's no 6-team buy anymore. Like we went back a few years, there was 6 teams, 6 teams, 6 teams. Yeah. This year it's spread out a lot easier, and I thought, this will be really simple. But as I started to play around with the team picker when it came out, and then my actual team when SuperCoach opened, it was pretty clear straight away that round 12 was going to be a bit hairy. And so for me, that presented the opportunity to start to think about my starting team and what will that look like. People are going to be heavily weighted with their premiums in that buy. And so how can you maybe get a bit of an edge around how you structure your team at the start? Obviously, you've got to consider each change you make causes a bit of a reaction. So you don't want to, for example, Bont's in that buy, Sherry's in that buy, Sheasel's in that buy, Juan Francis in that buy. They might be your number one rankings in your 4 positions. So I'm not saying don't start any buy players. That would be crazy, and that's certainly not what I'm doing. But I certainly am only starting 2 of those rather than 4 because I want to make sure that when I do my buy planning, I don't get too heavily weighted. Particularly, I don't necessarily plan for every buy. I don't think you can. But I do want to make sure that whichever one I feel is the hardest, I'm trying to get a competitive advantage on everybody else. That's probably the high level thinking. And then the other thing that I do, which might be a little bit interesting to know, I look at my team in viable scorers. And what I mean by that is when we all set up our starting teams, we have premiums, we have mid-prices, we have rookies as the three broad categories. I do my premiums and my mid-prices and I bucket them into, these are the ones that I want to get my scoring from. And so when I'm doing my buy planning, I'm targeting everything to how many of the rookies am I relying on for those rounds, and all of my upgrades through the season will also have that in mind. So it's not just a starting squad kind of thing. It's when I do my trades, if I've got a decision between two blokes, I'll certainly be looking at, well, what does that do for my viable scorers in round 12, 13, 14, 15, etc. So there's a couple of layers to the way I do my buy planning. I don't think it's rocket science either, by the way. I think everyone can do it. I just think sometimes people get fixated on individual players and not how it all fits in as a puzzle piece.
Yeah, for sure. And the round 12 buy that you mentioned does seem to be the really hard one. Like, I think there's 10 guys that I would love to start on that buy, even going down to like someone like a Rosie that's a bit of value, or an Ed Richards. But then, like you said, they've all got that buy. So then is your thinking that you might maybe, as you said, do less of those because you've identified that as the hard buy?
Yeah.
Whereas you might load up on some guys that have, an easier buy. So, for example, the round 13 only has Freo and St Kilda. Is that somewhere, like maybe you'll load up more on them because there's only two teams on the buy?
Yeah, it's certainly a consideration. St Kilda and Freo probably make up about 4 of my team at the moment. And I'm excluding the rookies here because I don't count them yet because they'll change by the time we get to that part of the season. Talking about the ones that I expect either to be still in my team or potentially still in my team. So some of the mid prices will get upgraded, but some might still be there. So when I look at those, I am targeting that round 12, I've got 5 max. And normally I would say that's too many, but I think there's too many good players to be too stubborn about that one. So 5 is my maximum for that one. I think at the moment, off the top of my head, I've got 4 from round 13, which is St Kilda and Freo. And then it's sort of, there's no more than 4 in any of the other buy rounds either. So trying to smooth those out is the other thing that I find is a bit of a hurdle if you go too heavy early in one or more of the buy rounds is you then trade into blokes during the year. So around 6 to 12, we call upgrade season in the SuperCoach world. If you have got like a set in your mind, I can't go into round 12 anymore, or I can't go into round 13 anymore, all of a sudden I'm missing out maybe on a great opportunity in my upgrades. So I want to try to make sure I'm not limiting my ability to still pick blokes I like along the way as well.
I think that's a great point because there could be, like last year, a Rosie injury that gets him to low 400k. And if you already believe you've got too many on that buy, you might kind of fade him, which might be a bit of a mistake. So I guess to avoid that, like you said, are you kind of just making sure that there's kind of even numbers across all 4 buys, or 5 this year, all 5 buys?
Yeah, there's 5. Not even, I don't think. I think I'm heavier in 12 and 13 than I am in 14, 15, 16. But certainly looking to spread it a little bit. And the other thing that I think has to come into the equation then, and I think we'll talk about this in a bit more depth later, it means that my plan can't avoid all the early buys because they have the great later buys. So I think you have to look at both in relation to each other. So if you just avoid all of the round 2, 3 and 4 buy players from your premiums and your mid prices, then you're by nature going to get stuck a little bit with your round 12 and 13, I feel. So I have no fear in starting a couple of round 2, 3 and 4 guys. Again, not too heavy. You don't want to be silly about it, but spreading your risk there so that they give you an opportunity for that round 15 and 16 buy that you've got some of those players already naturally selected.
I think that is a really good point because, as you mentioned, those players that play round 0 then have an early buy, obviously, in round 2, 3 or 4. But because of that, their mid-season buys are really late. So let's think about, I don't know, someone like Will Day or Will Ashcroft, someone like that, especially in that more mid-pricer range. Yes, you miss them in round 4 or 3, depending on which player we're talking about. But then they've got one of the really later mid-season buys. So you can actually run them and get all the way to their mid-season buy get that good cover through round 12, 13, even 14, and then flip them. So that's something I think it is good to talk about. And I've seen different I guess play styles as well. Some people like to have all the 5 buys really even and say, try and have 20 on-field players every single week because it's best 18, so you're good there. I've seen some people say they load up on the last buys, like kind of those round 14, 15 buys, so that they have heaps of players in there, but by the time they hit them, they've traded them. So an example, I don't know, someone like an Adelaide player or a West Coast, they're ones that or Richmond or Melbourne actually, they don't have the round 0 buy, an early buy.
Yeah.
And then they've got actually a nice mid-season buy. So someone that might even just be a cash cow in those, like a Trent Rivers, maybe you see him as the stepping stone. He could actually run through, get you heaps of good buy coverage, and then he could become a Sheasel off Sheasel's round 12 buy. So that's also a tactic that some people use of loading up on the later mid-season buys rather than the early mid-season buys to then trade.
Yep.
Do you have a thought on that in terms of, loading up and trading?
I like it, especially if you're talking like the example you used of a Rivers is a really good one, because those are the kind of guys that if you're picking someone like Rivers, if he becomes top 6, great. We change the equation halfway and we don't trade him for no reason. But the chances are you're probably going to upgrade him along the way. So I think those kind of players in that mid-price range that you're using as a stepping stone, I think that's a really good play to go for your round 15, 16 buy players for those types. Even if you want to use an example, someone that I think I'm about 90% sure I'm going to start is Nank. And Nank's got the round 14 buy, I think it is. And so I'm fading Sherry because he has the round 12 buy. And then my plan from the start is that after round 12, when Nank goes on his buy, it's going to be Nank to Sherry. I take advantage then of Sherry on the run home, but I use Nank for the first 12 weeks. That's sort of the kind of play that I think works really well if you can put some of your stepping stones back. Now, best laid plans don't always come off. Sometimes you have other issues and you can't pivot and you can't change, but that's the sort of thinking that I like to have. So at least I've got that in my mind when I'm making my upgrades throughout round 6 to 12.
Yeah, that exact scenario. Nank has been in my team for a lot of the year and the preseason, and Cherry hasn't. And I was considering that exact same swap as well. And it could be Nank, but also it could be someone like a Grundy or a Briggs or a Meek that has a slightly later buy than Cherry.
Yeah.
And that way, that position, let's say it's R1, you're getting maximum amount of games out of them. You're not like, you don't have a buy missing. So you're getting maximum amount of games throughout the year. So is that kind of, we talk about you use it, you like to attack the mid-season buys and think of them a way to make up points and ranks. Is that the way that you do it generally, of trading people coming up to their buy, going on to their buy, or is there other ways as well of, you think, making up ranks?
It depends, and I've probably done this 2 different ways. So I think 2 years ago, I certainly did do it exactly as we're describing. So I looked at, who am I going to trade at the right time? I didn't get the luxury of that last year. I sort of, for some reason, when I got to the buys, I had to really think about, because I started running out of trades. I think I only had 1 trade left post buys last year, and so I think that was probably, if you think about it in hindsight, like everybody else, I traded Martin in, out, in, traded Young out and back in. I traded, I think even McKercher was 3 times for me over the year. So I think those wasted trades meant last year I couldn't be as good at that. But what I did manage to do, which still worked, was I managed to get to a full primo team. Some of them were fake primos like Kerno in the end, but to a full team that I was comfortable with, where there was no rookies on field, so that when you get to those last couple of buys, your best 18. And I think the last buy last year I had 18 what I would have called primos, or in some of them in the category of fake primo, and everyone who dropped off was on a buy. And so I didn't have any extra, I didn't have any excess, I didn't loop, but I trusted the 18 that were left. And I think that's really critical when you're doing the buys, because, if you're relying on some of these guys who might get you 50s or 60s, it probably is going to be where you get hurt the most. having said that, this year with the flex, that might help a little bit even more because you're always going to have that one extra to drop off, hopefully. So it might mean this year you can be a little bit more aggressive even.
Yeah, the upgrade cadence really just seemed to go into overdrive last year with, I guess, round zero, kickstarting people's cash generation early, and people were upgrading earlier and earlier. I remember even a couple of years ago, aim was to have your full premium side coming out of the buys. So in those buy rounds, you were doing your final upgrades and bringing in people coming off their buys. But last year, it seemed like most people were full primo, coming into the buys, which can be good, I guess. But then it also means that you're not doing that, Nank to Cherry or whatever it might be, Rivers to Sheasel. You kind of, if you're already set there and use most of your trades before the buys, actually think could potentially be a bit of a negative, because then you're not maximizing games played throughout the buys potentially.
And post buy, it was certainly a negative for me in the long run. So while it helped me in the buys, I think my numbers were something like 83 at the start of the buys, 32 at the end of the buys in rank last year. But what happened was I only had one trade left, and then I ended up 309th overall. So I dropped off after the buys, and I think where my lessons from last year mostly come from are I did two things terribly wrong. Like I mentioned, trading in and out of the same blokes too many times. And the other thing that I did was I chased a couple of the shiny new toys like Luke Ryan at 690,000 or whatever the hell he got to, and paying up massive for that when they then plateaued just meant that my trades were gone and I ended up with Ryan instead of Sinclair, for example. I would have loved Sinclair on the run home, but I didn't have a trade to get him, and I picked Ryan at too high a price, meaning my trades were gone as well.
Yeah, I think that is a really good learning. And just the episode prior to this one, Tommy and I ran through our learnings from 2024, and what you've just mentioned there actually came up quite a bit, was the two things: the trading too aggressively, nearly like starting the upgrade cadence too early. Well, not necessarily too early, but it means you were reaching for guys that you probably didn't want a little bit, as opposed to the guys that you really wanted. But also, like you said, paying up for those shiny new toys really, really hurts. I actually think that's where people lose Supercoach a lot more. A failed mid-pricer or like a Jaden Short or someone going at an 80, if you start him, it's not great, but it doesn't necessarily kill you. Whereas trading in a Luke Ryan at 670k and then him going sub-tons, that is actually what kills you. And it kills your upgrade cadence, it kills everything, it kills your cash gen. You then, well, for me, I also didn't get a couple of the really good rookies, so I had to settle for really subpar D5 and D6. Yeah. But if I didn't pay for Luke Ryan and I actually got Jack Sinclair, like you said, it'd be a lot more balanced. So it's interesting. I think we tell ourselves not to do it every year, not to pay, 650k for a guy, but it's so hard to go.
Still do it. It's hard because you just, especially when you're looking at overall rank, but you're also, most of us are in leagues and stuff like that as well. And you see the opponent every week has Luke Ryan getting 150, 140. I think he had 191 game, didn't he? And it's so hard to resist picking him up when you can do it. But it does hurt, and it did hurt me at the end of the year. I had to settle for, I think my F6 and F7 were Curnow and Simpkin or something like that. And I had Curnow on the field and couldn't get him off the week he got a 17 or whatever it was, and that just kills your whole season. So
yeah, for sure. And then one of the other things I've been thinking about a bit more is the really, really good rookies. So like a couple of years ago, Dacos, the Sheasels, even the McKercher, although his was a bit different because he got injured. This year, who knows, it might be a Levi Ashcroft maybe, is actually holding them a lot longer. Like we will, in this upgrade cadence, craze, we'll often be culling these really good rookies around like round 7 or 8 or 9 because I've made 200k. But often with these really top tier picks, if you just held them a bit longer till their buy, say Levi Ashcroft, until his buy, the really good ones, they seem to go well, plateau a bit, and then go up again. So there's potentially more cash to be made, but they could also be really good buy cover once those top tier, top 5, top 10 draft pick rookies really get the hang of it. So that is one of my learnings a bit as well. Like
I think that's really, I think that's really closely related to some of the buy planning too, because if you think about your team, the best rookies in most teams are starting at the start of the year. And so usually your reliable ones, like we just mentioned, people like Ashcroft, you can even consider Sardis that, even though he's not first year, he's at 190K. Those first bulk sort of around 2, 3, 4, you would expect that your buy cover is okay because you're probably going for 30 green dots first week as well. So you've got a heap of cover to go best 18. As we get to the middle of the year, and sometimes rookies can get really scarce, and you're picking let's use Jones as an example for last year at GWS. Everyone jumped on him because we all play the break-even game, and we get a little bit sort of seduced by that, even though the role was never there and stuff. He was the best of a bad situation, so we pick him. And then we get to the buys, and we've got 7 players not playing because they're on a buy, plus we've got 2 or 3 rookies that are dead by now, and our other rookies might be low scorers. It really does impact who you're starting. So I think your point is really valid for which ones have the role, and I think role should determine it. Which of your rookies have the role to keep, even if they dip a bit in cash gen, so that you can keep them through that buy as your safe floor, 70s, 80s, and which ones are the ones that you want to take advantage of the cash because you maybe don't trust the role and you do want to cash them in for something better.
Yeah, for sure. So if Levi Ashcroft gets to 400K or something by round 10, it might be worth holding him till his buy, even if, you project him to maybe lose a bit, go down to 380. Yeah, sure, you lose 20K, but you're also getting really good buy coverage. And then when he hits his buy, then you can flip him and kind of use him to do your final upgrades. And I think that also applies to mid prices. One of my big regrets last year, not regrets, but it was definitely premature, was trading out D'Ambrosio. When he maxed out, he was at the top of his cash, I thought. I can't remember when it was, but it was probably around 6 or 7 or something. And he was another one that, moving to a new team, a new role, those first 6 weeks, he was really good and made a lot of money. But then he actually got his groove going and went even up further, and he had one of the last buys. So I did, around the mid-season buys, I looked at some of those best teams, the best ranked teams. They were still holding D'Ambrosio, Carl Amon, guys like that. So that is, especially if they've got the later buy. So I'm now looking at, teams that have the later buy. Like you said, some of them have the early buy. So if you do have a mid-pricer, like let's say it's a Matt Roberts, and Matt Roberts is going well, making money, you don't think he's going to be a keeper. Let's say he's averaging like 102. There would be a temptation to trade him out when you think he's probably top cash, but I actually think he's an example. Perryman may be the same, that you just ride to their buy. Doesn't matter if they leak a little bit.
Yeah, I love that concept, because I think the other thing to keep in mind is when you talk about these guys not playing and the early buys especially, people, and I hear the argument and I get the argument that if you've got a choice between 2 players, one that's got an early buy and one that doesn't, well, it's natural to go the one who doesn't. But I think there's a little bit of a misconception in how many points you really lose. If you spread your team well, for example, and let's use your example just then that you had of someone going 102, like a Matt Roberts who's got the round 3 buy. In the early buys, you would expect to be looping and having probably a reliance on 4 rookies, roughly, at round 3 out of your best 18, because you should have 14 pretty reliable scorers if you've got 1 or 2 on that by max. And so when you're talking 4 out of 8 rookies that you've probably got on your bench, you should be able to manufacture 70s. So you're talking about 30 points. So if you think it's worth holding for 30 points, I think it's okay. I think the problem becomes and this was a definite consideration last week when we had the trial games, and it looked like you're going to have Mills, Matt Roberts, SDK, Perryman, all on the round 3 buy. Yep. They're all from the same sort of position. That starts getting problematic. You don't want to have 4 out from the one spot. But I think if you spread them wisely, 30 or 40 points for a mid-pricer or even a premium 40 to 50 points isn't so much over a season, especially because you get some of these guys like, let's call it Neil, Zorko, Zach Merritt. They're pods and they're bloody good players. So the advantage you could get by picking 1 or 2 of them can sometimes outweigh that 40-point loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when I look at some of the buys this year, round 15, which is the second last buy, there's actually 3 teams on that don't have a round 0 game and an early bye. So this is Adelaide, Melbourne, and West Coast. So that's actually, for me, the best run or prime fixture if you're looking for someone like a mid-pricer that you can just sit them in your team until the round 15 bye. They don't have a round 0 bye. They might max out at round 9, but if you just keep them there till round 15, they're probably still giving you 80s or 90s, which is a lot better than, as you said, those rookies that we upgrade to at round 8. They're sometimes pretty dodgy. So, yeah, I'd encourage people to think about mid-prizes, especially from Adelaide, Melbourne, and West Coast, or even the bye before, guys like Richmond, things like that. So, yeah, the mid-prices from the early round team. So, I mean, I'm talking about early mid-season, round 12.
12, yeah.
Yep. They're a bit less tempting to me because you won't then, you'll be stuck with them on the round 12 bye, but the later mid-season buys, I think that's a really good place to target A, really good rookies, or B, mid-prices that can just see you through the buys.
I agree. And I think have a plan. The other thing you can do, let's say, and mid-prices are pretty popular this year. Let's say you do like some from that round 12 buy, and who's in that buy? You got Chera, who's a pretty popular mid-pricer in there.
Ollie Hollands.
You got Hollands, you've got the Western Bulldogs, you've got Colonel Sanders, these kind of guys. Let's say you do like some of them. Having a couple is okay, and then having some James Peatling, some of these others that have got a bit more later. So all you've then got to do is, as you're moving through your upgrade cadence, if you're making a decision on which ones to cut at round 9, that's where you might say, I'm keeping Peatling and I'm cutting Chera, even though maybe Chera's going 5 points more. I don't really care because it's going to help me for 4 weeks during the buys. Yeah. That's the kind of decision you can then make along the way. So I think it's just worth thinking about how you're using it, because we all get sucked in a little bit to short-term decision making as the season goes on. Every coach does it. We see the break even and we see leaking cash and we get nervous. We say we've got to cut this bloke now, but sometimes we get a bit too carried away.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we do look at it well in terms of who we're trading in. So like our upgrades in round 8, for example, we do think about what their buy is. So if we're bringing in, I don't know, Petrarca, or we're bringing in Bont at round 8, we know what buy they have and we're planning for that. But I think it's the going out people, the people leaving our team that we don't actually really consider. Yep. Would it be handy to have James Peatling through the buys? Or, I don't know, whoever it is in West Coast, like maybe Ryan Marich has actually been going really well in a back roll or something, whoever it is. But I think we should think a bit more about the players we're trading out and actually, could I just hold them because they're really helpful for the buy?
Agree.
Yeah. I think that was a really, really good discussion about buys. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to add in terms of buys and buy structures and how you plan and attack? Or
I think we've covered most of the things that I sort of target. I think the main moral of the story, though, is have a plan. I think not having one at all is dangerous. Like, yes, you might fluke it. You might get to round 12 and get lucky. But I think if you don't have any idea of what you're going to do along the way, it's fraught with danger. So I would say have some plan for it. And then go with what you think is going to work best for you, because we all know that there'll be a hidden gem that pops up that mean we have to chase that person. There'll be someone going worse or better than we anticipated in our planning at the start. So it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to get this, like even my Nank to Sherry kind of story from before, that might not go perfectly, but at least have some of those plans in the back of your head so that you've got it ready to go.
Yeah, and planning that at the start of the season, like you said, can just not work. But once you get into round 10 and 11, I think we've got a good idea, and you can plan a lot of these things. Like you can go, I know I'm trading Peatling out at round 15. I know, Jack Sinclair's just come off his bye and he's got a really great run, so I'm going straight to him. So I actually think once you get to 10 and 11 round 10 and 11, you can actually make those plans quite firmly. And an injury might throw it and screw you up, but I think most of the time it can happen and can work pretty well. And it does tie in as well that, like you said, not paying the 650k guys, that is what actually really does kill us. Yep. If there's guys coming off their bye, like you and I are talking about Cherry having a really, really nice run home. If he's had a little bit of a tough start and he's under 600k, there might be some people that go, look, I actually don't think he's a top 3 ruck. He hasn't really shown it the first half. But you and I have seen that he's got a really nice fixture coming home. He's got that first bye. I think he's going to do well. So we would still launch into it.
Absolutely, and I think that's where the real, I guess, the way you watch the games, the way you look for roles, the way you look for why is he scoring under par at the moment, that's really important. Forget bye structure for a second. That's just important all the way along. Because a perfect example of that last year was sort of Dawson. You could jump on him. I think he was sub 500 at one point. Jumping on those guys and getting it right versus jumping on them and getting it wrong is massive difference between your season going well and going poorly.
Yeah, LDU, another example that people jumped on for under 550k, whereas a lot of us paid 650 for him. So that's one thing. So now, I guess moving on, we've got 2 players that we're going to chat about. But first, question from the Dr. Supercoach Slack community that I'm asking everyone: who's one player that you really want to start, but you probably don't have the guts to?
He's been discussed in a couple of your other episodes, so I don't want to necessarily go through him too much, but Isaac Rankin's the man for me.
Yeah.
I really want to start him, but I can't afford, in my structure, I can't afford both him and Jason Horne-Francis. And I reckon for 3/4 of this preseason, I was prioritising Rankin over Horne-Francis because of the ceiling. But as the season's got closer, I think I'm going more to the safety of Jason Horne-Francis and less to the risk of Isaac Rankin. He would be one. The other 2 are actually in my team. Zorko and Nick Martin. They were people who I am a little bit nervous about, but I currently have them in my team. So I don't know whether that sort of cancels out the question of I'm too nervous to start them, because at the moment they're there, but they might not last. So that'd be the 3 though that I'm the most on the fence about.
Well, I think that's great. And Rankin's one where I've had him and Jason Horne-Francis pretty much since my chat with Selby on this episode. He just convinced me on Rankin. But now that all these mid-price defenders are falling over themselves, I feel like my defense is going to have a restructure, and it's probably going to be at the cost of Rankin. Yeah. Maybe. So I don't know. He's still in my team at the moment, but I'm kind of just waiting for all these preseason games to really
it'll tell us a lot.
Who's there?
Do you have one that you haven't mentioned yet that's the sort of you'd love to put in that's not there yet?
No, not necessarily. I do. I think I'm at the point where if my gut's really feeling it, I might just go for it. There's a few. The one that us being Bombers fans, Dylan Shields going to tempt too many people. I feel like that role is just Nick Martin Piggery role, but he's also soft tissue and not that great of a disposer by foot. So he's one that he's the opposite. He's one where I really don't want to pick him, but that role is just also tempting me.
I think the round 0 scores are going to be so interesting here. Like if you get a Dylan Shield going at 110 and you've got that in the bank coming into round 1, it's going to be hard to say, I'm going to avoid him, but I'm with you, like being a Bombers man as well. I haven't got him in my team, and I don't think I'll have him unless it's a correction trade. Like if, for example, I've got Will Day in my team. If Will Day goes pear-shaped, considering Dylan Shields on the same buy, if he's going to go up in price and looks to be good at round 2 or whatever their price change happens, I might pivot that way. But otherwise, I don't think I'm going to go there, because I think, he's going to get a lot of the pill, but he's going to butcher it a bit. But I think it's a great move for Essendon, not so much for me for Supercoach.
Yeah, no, I think so. So he's not one I don't have the guts to. It's just I don't want to. I really don't want to. Don't force me, Dylan.
The numbers sway us either way, though, don't they? Like sometimes there's blokes you don't really want, and Bailey Smith might be that reverse one for me. And I know he didn't play in the practice match yesterday, but he's one I just don't want to pick. But at 60-something% owned, if he had a round 0-100, it's going to be gutsy to not jump with the crowd for me. So there's that reverse ones that are really interesting.
Now, if we get to our 2 players that we want to chat about, and they're both, quite similar priced in the defensive line, in that kind of mid-pricey defense area. So the first one you wanted to bring up is a new Collingwood recruit. Who's that?
Harry Perryman is the man I thought I'd bring to the table. I've been really interested in him throughout the preseason, probably since I think there was an article where Scott Pendlebury called early that he's going to be part of the midfield group. So as a super coach player, you obviously listen for little snippets like that and you say, all right, here's a role change that we could take advantage of. So I went and did a little bit of digging, and he's priced at about the 77 range, so 417K. He's a defender, so if he does get this midfield role, you're going to look at a DPP advantage in round 6 or whenever that changes. In games where he played 50% or more CBAs, it's a small sample. There's only 7 games at GWS, but he scored a 99 average. And where it's 30% more, he had a 95 average. So he sort of doesn't need your bulk. He doesn't need to be the 70% CBA guy for this to be viable. I think in my calculations, I reckon he'd be a great stepping stone pick if he can get 50 to 65% CBAs. And I'll be looking for tonight and see how that goes in his practice match, and then looking for round 0, which I love that this guy's in round 0 because we'll get a real game to see what those CBAs look like. But I think if everything goes to plan, he could be a beautiful D4, D3.
Yeah, I'm really quite interested in Harry Perryman as well. In that their scratch match, which obviously that weird 3-way game, he was just in there all the time at a lot of CBAs. So I guess one thing we do need to discuss is Collingwood's midfield. So I expect Nick Dacos to be the main man in there, and like could be 80% CBAs. He could just be in there all the time. For me, the number 2 option's either going to be De Goey or Perryman. De Goey's had an interrupted preseason, but when he's healthy, I probably think De Goey probably is the number 2 with Perryman being the number 3. That's just how I'm feeling. It could be the other way around. They also have guys like Chris, Pendlebury and Mitchell to roll through there, but I can't really see any of them getting more CBAs than Perryman. You know, they recruit him for a purpose. He's a big-bodied, lockdown, defensive mid. That's what they recruit him for. How do you read the Pies midfield mix? Do you kind of agree with that, or do you think I've missed someone out? Or
No, I think it's similar. I think probably the 2 like-minded ones that I can see are Crisp and him. Like, do they play both? Like in the last game with that triangle game, they played both in the middle a lot. Interesting now bringing Pendlebury back in for tonight, whether one of the 2 get a little less. So they'll be looking for that. Does Crisp or Perryman get less CBAs than they got early because of the introduction of Pendlebury? De Goey, I think, is going to miss a few games early, so that might help either way. But I think you've nailed it. I think that's probably the order, and I see, Dacos is going to be the main man, and I think this guy could potentially be their midfielder number 2. If he is, that should guarantee us enough CBAs to be viable.
Yeah, I think he could kind of be like the Josh Dunkley, like what Dunkley does for Neil.
Yeah,
maybe want him doing that for Nick Dacos. So if the role's there, that defensive role, he's going to get a lot of tackles. That's going to be one of the things. So playing that defensive lockdown role, I looked at games where he had 5+ tackles per game. Ooh. In his career, he's had 27 of games with at least 5 tackles. In those games, he's averaged 90 SuperCoach, so it's not massive, but a lot of those games were off halfback with 0 CBAs. So you mentioned the 95 average in games where he has 30 CBAs. I mentioned the 90 SuperCoach average when he has 5 tackles. I think that 90 to 95 is kind of his floor, and I think there's plenty of upside from there. He's had 28 games where he's gone over 100 SuperCoach for his career. I actually heard Drew Jones from Fox Sports was comparing his role to George Hewitt in that year when George Hewitt came from Sydney to Carlton. He kind of got put in the midfield as that defensive bodied mid. In that year, Hewitt broke out and averaged 111 SuperCoach. He was one of the best picks of the year. Yeah, I don't expect Perryman to average 111 SuperCoach, but I wouldn't be surprised with a triple figure average. That's probably about where I'm going to put it.
Yeah, I've been telling a few people when they ask about Perryman, like, what are your expectations? And I'm a natural pessimist when I plan these mid prices, and so I'm going in my own head. I'm saying if he can average 95, I'm happy with the pick. Yeah. And I think, like you say, that floor of I agree about 90 is probably his floor. I think there's there's less variance in this mid-pricer than some of the others that I might consider. And so I think it's a pretty good pick. To be a really successful pick, it wouldn't be that hard to go 100, right? That's a great pick to get you through. If you got your 417k D4 or D3 going at 100 all the way through to their buys, then you can make a decision after that whether you want to pivot to somebody else. It wouldn't take much for him to go up 85k and someone like a Sheasel or a Whitfield or whatever to come down 85k, and all of a sudden the bridge isn't very far at all.
Yeah, and that's the value of these stepping stones. Like, we want them to make a bit of money, but a lot of it is actually just waiting for the big dogs to come down in price and just bridging that gap, like you said. And, you know, with Mills and Coleman ruling themselves out, there's now a question mark around Bailey Smith's health, SDK's ruck roll, Roberts is lacking kick-in. Like, he didn't have many kick-ins in that practice game. There's actually a chance that Perryman's the safest option out of all of these, you know, round 3 buy players. So,
agree. And I think the position makes this. Sorry, the position makes this one even more attractive. Like, I don't think any of us trust the defensive rookies. Let's be honest. So you don't want too many of them on the field. I don't even really have a strong view after Sheasel of who's going to be the best premiums out of this mix. You've got some sort of question marks or early buys through all of them. You've either got Zorko, Whitfield with early buys. You've got Ryan and Clark, who knows what's going to happen there. You've got Martin, who's gone to half forward, who I still love, but he's not in the same role. There's Wanganeen, Miller and Sinclair in the same team. What will that look like? So I think there's enough doubt at the top end, at the bottom end in defence that Perryman plus the bloke you're about to bring to the table both become really interesting discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great segue. We now move on to my player I'm bringing is Trent Rivers. A bit more expensive, more in the 460k. So you're paying another 50k on top of Perryman, but he doesn't have the round 0 and then the early buy. So, and he actually has a really nice mid-season buy, as I said. So he's potentially someone that you could run through right to, I think it's round 15 buy. Yep, round 15. And he can cover you for a lot of those games. There is some a lot more question marks for me on Trent Rivers than there is on Harry Perryman, which we'll go through. But so, you know, he has, as we said, he's got a nice mid-season buy. The excitement with Rivers from the community is that he's been training as an inside mid over the preseason. He did play there last year, especially when Petrarca was out. So after Melbourne's buy last year was essentially when he moved in. He moved into the midfield role. He averaged 93 SuperCoach in that midfield role, as opposed to an 80 average pre-buy. So it's a jump of 13 points. I think a lot of people are thinking, a bit like that thing with Ed Richards, is that now a full preseason training as a mid, you know, he should be able to do better than that 93. But some of my questions here, that 93 average he had as a full-time mid, he had 65% CBAs to do that. Now this year I expect Oliver and Viney to be the number 1 and number 2 CBA guys this year. The question for me then is Rivers in next, or is it Petrarca? Because whether he's the 3rd or 4th option probably does make a difference, and that might even be, you know, what makes or breaks the pick is how many CBAs he gets. So how do you kind of see that D's rotation? I know Petrarca's had an interrupted preseason and he's still not full contact, but I know there's a lot of people that think, and probably me included, probably think that Petrarca should be in the CBAs a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Melbourne's a really interesting one because they've also got Langford, who they've just drafted, who can play inside mid. Obviously, they're not going to destroy a kid and play him every week, but he might be part of that mix. Rumours about bringing maybe the best specific wingman in the comp into the midfield, which I don't understand at all. Langdon, like he's a great winger. Why would you mess with that? Why would you mess with Windsor? So I'm a bit unsure about Melbourne. I agree, it's not as safe as maybe Perryman, where you can really identify Collingwood's starting mids. Rivers is in the mix, but we don't really know where. I guess the flip side to that might be if he averaged 93, where last year they had no Petrarca, Oliver was not himself. He really struggled. does he get some benefit with the better players around him? Maybe because he's not necessarily going to be reliant on going and winning every first ball, even though he's an inside mid. He's still going to be okay on the outside. So maybe does Oliver get some first possession and he becomes a first receiver on occasions that helps his scoring as well? I'm not sure. So there's a lot more variables, though, I agree, with the Rivers midfield time and what that looks like. So that's something we need to be careful of. But there are some positives, like the no buy, like the fact that he's trained there and he's now had a pre-season there and all these kinds of things.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one for me because if he goes at that 93 average that he did when he was a midfield role, and as I said, he needed 65% CBAs to do that, and I actually could see 65% dropping off, with everyone healthy now. So that is my question mark. But if he does go 80 and 93, is that even enough? He's not going to make much money at all going at 93. So like it'll be less than 50K. Like we're talking a few, a few dozen thousand, depending on spike scores and whatnot. So if you know why he's in your team and it's not to make money necessarily, it's just to be a placeholder, get you through all the buys, just be solid 90s, keep a rookie off field. If you want someone like that, I think Rivers is a pretty fair option. But I think with a lot of these mid prices, we probably also want them to maybe squeeze us like a 70 or an 80K price jump as well. Yeah. And that I'm not sure Rivers will do that, but
I think they're really fair questions on the pick, and I think that's something that people need to really think about when they're picking blokes. What are you picking them for? And I must admit, last week I probably had Rivers in my team because I was thinking about Mills, Perryman, Rivers, and the fact that he didn't have the buy was really attractive to me because I didn't want to swap him, for example, for someone like a SDK or something that had the same round 3 buy. But now that they've thinned out a little bit, I'm just thinking maybe I don't need to worry about Rivers now because in my head I think he's also a placeholder. I don't know he's going to make cash, and I don't know he's going to score enough to be someone you want to rely on. But yeah, it's one of those up in the air picks for sure.
Yeah, well, that's giving people something to think about. But I do think one of the takeaways is that not everyone has to have the same role in your team. I think there's a lot of people thinking you're either a primo to score money or you're there to make. You're either a primo to score points or you're there to make money. I think there is some avenue to have some people in there that just place hold and hold down a 95, keep a rookie off field, have a nice buy, and then get flipped at their buy. Maybe Rivers could be that, but like I said, I think I'd probably rather my people doing that still trying to make me 50 to 80K, if possible. And I do think there are some other people around his price. Well, I'm going to say Ollie Hollands at quite a bit cheaper is an example that I think will still give me 90s, but also make me money. So that's kind of where I'm weighing up kind of a lot of those picks.
Yeah, it's a good thought, and I think that's what people need to consider out there. It's like I hear a lot of people get fixated on the player or this. I can't miss this guy, but it's about what. I think that's a great question. Everyone should just be asking themselves, what's he there to do? And if you can get comfortable with that, pick him. If he can't do what you want him for, then don't go somewhere else. I think that's a great bit of advice.
Yeah, and then we're not talking about Jaden Short, but Jaden Short's another one that has a very good late buy. Doesn't have a round 0 and early buy. He's someone that I'm probably also projecting only has like a 95 average kind of at best. So he's probably not really going to make much money either, really, in SuperCoach. I think in fantasy he's a better pick, but in SuperCoach, probably not going to make that much money. But if you know why he's in your team, maybe it's okay. But if you're picking him as, a money maker, I think, there's a reassessment needed potentially.
For sure. And I think the thing with Jaden Short, not to go too deep into a third player, but if Richmond's game style looks like it is that slow play, like they did, I don't know if they can keep that up, what they did against West Coast. It seemed ridiculous the way they played back there. But if they're chipping it around the back line, Short might get back to where he was 2 years ago, and he could be viable. Every Richmond supporter I talk to hates that the short pick. So
Yeah.
it makes me nervous to even be talking about him, because I'm like, if they don't like him and they see him more than I do, why should I get on there? But just the role, the not his role change, but the team role and the team game style change is something to look for in that pick if you like him.
Absolutely. I think that was a really, really good episode on how to plan for the buy, how to attack the buys, using it as a way to try and increase your rank and increase your points. And like, it's something, as I said, I haven't been great at. Even the year I finished 95th, I think I went into the buys at 700th and I came out of the buys at 700th. But then I just had a lot of trades and absolutely stormed home. But if I could have, employed some of your strategies and maybe halved my rank through the buys, who knows, it might have been a better finish. But that's something that I'm trying to learn from. And I think we've, given some people some really good insights about how to do that. I'm definitely going to be taking a bit away from this. So thanks very much for your time, Hurls. Do you want to let everyone know, you're pretty active on Twitter, let people know where they can find you on Twitter and what else, the Insight Fantasy Sports team have coming up and what you've got planned?
Yeah, thanks, Big, and thanks for having me on. I must admit, when you asked me, my initial thought was, geez, I've watched a couple of your episodes with legends like Selby and these guys that I consume content of. What am I going to add to the mix? So it was a real sort of humbling experience to come on, but I love talking SuperCoach. We've connected a lot on Twitter over the years and bantered every now and then about different picks we're considering. So you're someone that I love listening to. So to be able to come on and have a chat for an hour about SuperCoach has been a real privilege. So thank you. But people can find me basically on Twitter, or X as it's now known, at Silvertop Hurls is my handle. You'll see me most of the time on there tweeting about either Essendon, and if you want to mute me because of my Essendon rants, that's okay. I won't take offence, or about SuperCoach, and particularly in the preseason, what we're trying to do at Insight Fantasy Sports is one of us has a really keen eye on each practice game and put some notes out. So you'll see all of the boys tweeting out different notes about who's going well in the preseason to help super coaches plan for their starting team. But it's a good crew. I'm really loving being a part of it. This is my first year dabbling in a little bit of content creation. So massive thanks to Horse, who's sort of dragged me into the Insight Fantasy Sports Network, and they do some great stuff, not just on AFL but NFL and NRL and BBL and all the different sports. So if you like consuming lots of content, I'll never say only go to that one, because I consume a lot of content. I would say to everyone else, consume as much content as you can, because each person has just a different perspective and you can always learn something from all the different content creators out there. So if Insights Fantasy Sports isn't on your list yet, chuck it on and add it to the list of all the other great people out there in SuperCoach who are giving some brilliant content.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've been noticing the stat collecting and the watching and the notes from all the practice games, and it's been pretty good, you guys having someone across every game. So that's been pretty handy. But no, very happy to have you on. And like I said, outsourcing a weakness for me, which is the buy planning. I'm going to be coming to you and saying, what do we think about this guy on the buy?
Do it.
So,
go for it.
There we go. We've found our buy expert for this series. So
I'll be doing the same for your captains, mate. So don't worry about that. We'll be able to help each other.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for your time, and everyone else that's watching, listening. This is now the 9th episode. Like I said, we've got one more coming, and it's an absolutely huge one with the 2024 SuperCoach winner, Jovan. Going to be picking his brains about how he did it. But as I said, this is the 9th one, so there's been 8 more before this. So if you haven't yet, go back through the videos. As Hurl said, we've had some awesome guests on, DR, Selby, a bunch of other legends. So go back and watch them. But geez, we're getting close to round 0 now, Hurls, and Essendon, maybe getting a win over Gold Coast to kick off the season.
Undefeated in February, we are. It's bloody good. No, we won't get carried away, but it's exciting. It's exciting this time of year because we're all square.